You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma podcast. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today. But before we do, I've got to thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They've been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is the Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma. And it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. A huge shout out to Governor Anatobi for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. Our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. And let's get into today's episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode down at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame today with my guest. Please welcome Jane Jayroe Gamble to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming down.
Oh, it's just a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about you. I've read your bio multiple times. I see your name everywhere in either you're on boards or you're doing things. I have a lot of friends that went to OCU, so
great.
A lot of OCU alumni and just kind of, I think a lot of people will recognize your name, right? But, the goal for today's podcast is to dive into, why you do what you do, kind of what led you to go down the journalism route and all of the amazing things that you've done that way, the boards that you're on. So excited to dive into things. I think we're down at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. You were inducted in 2007.
Greatest honor.
Yeah. Tell me about that. That time, that induction ceremony that year, and how was that when you got that phone call?
It was just spectacular. It was something, I guess, that I'd hoped for but never expected. And because the thing I'm most recognized for is Miss America in 1967, but that's a long time from 1967 to 2007. And I did have a fairly public career, and yet still it was that event so long ago that perhaps set me apart from others, and I've always felt like that it was also the careers and my passion for Oklahoma that also contributed to being chosen for the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, because I love this state. My roots grow very deep, and it's just always been an honor and privilege to be a part of the fabric of the state.
Yeah, who introduced you at the ceremony that day?
Well, that's always a big choice.
It's a tough choice, right?
It's a very tough choice, and I had some people that were nationally recognized, like Phyllis George, and there were others, Jimmy Webb, Scott Pelley, but I really wanted Norman Neves, who was the senior pastor at United Methodist Church of the Servant, and I felt like he knew my core values, and he knew all of my journey. He knew the really tough times, he knew the ugly times, and the dark times, and yet he was also around for the victories, and he was one of those people, together with his wife, Kip, that always saw the best in me. And I think that's such an amazing gift to give to people. No matter how much you stumble or mess up, that like Jesus, they always see and care about who you are. Yeah. And they're able to see through the mess to the good parts.
Yeah. So growing up in Laverne.
Laverne,
right? take us there. What's it like growing up in Laverne?
Well,
and did you have brothers and sisters and house family? What's that like?
It was the greatest way to grow up, I think. And it's always fun for me to connect with other people in Oklahoma City who are small town people because there is a difference in how you grow up. You miss out on some things. Like I always loved music, and there wasn't really a choral music department. I did play in the band, and I also sang a lot. But there was no way to perform in a musical, and that was something I really wanted to do. My mother would drive me. She was a fifth grade school teacher, and on Wednesdays after school, she would drive me to Beaver, Oklahoma, so I could take voice lessons with someone who was very good there. That's the kind of things that are limiting in a small town. I never could take dance lessons. But what you receive is so extraordinary. And that's the ability to do a lot of things and to risk failing. And that's such a great gift when you're young to know that if you fail, if you try to be a drum major or you want to be a cheerleader, that you may not make it, but if you do, you can still stumble around. And it's okay because there's whole community there to support you. Girls basketball was the big thing in Laverne, and I loved playing the game and we had great teams. And really, in thinking back, I didn't realize the value of it at the time, but I just think every time I'd step up to the free throw line at the time, I could feel the support of a community. Every time we went to a tournament, there was the support of all these people that were cheering for you. And after the game, even if you didn't play that well, you had people patting you on the back. Oh, you did a great job, blah, blah. It's a wonderful environment to be able to grow up in the midst of that encouragement.
That's really special. Yeah, you're right. I've had a lot of guests on the podcast that have come from small towns, and they said they share the same thing.
Do
right?
they?
They get to do everything, right? And sometimes
everything.
It's not out of choice. It's like you're going to play this sport or you're going to do this thing because we need people to do it.
That's
fill
right.
A team.
I wore my cheerleading outfit in the band so that we could do the pregame, and I could still be a cheerleader.
That's awesome. So you mentioned you're always singing. You kind of had a love for band as well. Where does that love of music come from an early age?
Oh, I think it's my family.
Okay.
But I also think it's something you're born with. And that is just, I was just listening this morning. I'm more interested in classical music at this stage of my life than I have been previously. And Saturday night was Beethoven's 7th Symphony. And it was just, I was listening to it again this morning. I was just kind of blown away. And I think not everyone has the same response. And I like all good music, I like to think. But certainly there's some music, some styles of music that speak to me and really connect. And that's always been the case. I remember being really small, and I would play some character in my mind, and it was always involving music. And I was blessed for the fact that my mother insisted that we participate in church when we were young, and that also meant the choir. She kind of had a philosophy that if you've been given a gift, it's your responsibility to give the gift back and to share it and develop it. So she did everything that I really contribute to having that sense developed, because it would have been so easy. I mean, she wasn't a pushy mother in terms of performance at all, but I loved to sing in front of people. So she just supported that and enabled me to do it as much as I could in that environment.
Yeah, that's really nice. So because of that, then from a young age, then I guess you had your sights set on, I want to do this as a career, I want to do this for the rest of my life. How do I get in front of bigger, better stages? Right.
And so the Miss America pageant was just a big dream of mine. I never even imagined that I could do it, but I dreamed about it. And it was in my mind, and I would practice walking down the runway, and I would watch the pageant every year. So because it seemed like that I don't know, it just spoke to me.
Yeah.
And then I did want to go very much to Oklahoma City University because they had a great music department and they had great basketball teams at the time. So it was like, and they were Methodist, which also fit for me, but it was very expensive. And my parents, I had a full ride to another university, and I got a small scholarship at OCU, and my parents, God bless them, they just enabled me to do that. And that's one of those big turning points. You know, you make decisions as you travel down the road, but some of them are so critical in terms of where they lead. And without attending OCU, I would not have entered the Miss Oklahoma City pageant. I would not have had the support of that School of Music, even though I wasn't a star there at all. The sorority and the people that were there, it was just the right step, and it led me very quickly to something that I would never have really thought could happen at that age.
Right. Well, and you're so right. Like, Oklahoma City University still to this day has everything you could possibly need for someone who wants to go into music, pageants, sport, whatever it is.
It does. If you need, I could have really been lost at a big school because I was shy and I was from a small town, and I didn't think that was an asset always. And so OCU was just the right place for me.
That's amazing. And obviously you're still doing a lot at OCU and a lot to give back, and still very involved at OCU, which I'm sure we'll get to. But so when you get to OCU then, what is, what do you decide that I'm going to major in music and something?
Well, at that time, growing up female in a small town, there were women in just a few professions. They were a teller at the bank, they were nurses, they were teachers. And I never could see beyond that, really. And I had a wonderful family life growing up, and my mother taught school. My sister taught school. That was later, of course, but my dad was a basketball coach and then taught, and then also was the school superintendent. So that was what I thought I was supposed to do. So I majored in music education, because a woman at that time always needed something to fall back on.
Yeah. Right.
You never thought about a career.
Yeah.
And there was nobody on television news on the air except for Barbara Walters in the morning. So I majored in music education. Ironically, I had a job on campus, and it was with the journalism department. And I just feel enormously blessed that my life gave me the opportunity to do television news, because that was really the right fit for me. I'm passionate about music, always will be. I did some performing, but really the call for me was in the areas of communication, in particular television news.
Yeah. So that's where then, that kind of, those two go together, right? You talk about, doing Miss Oklahoma City pageants, and then you're working at the journalism department, and you have the job there. What time does it become that you think, I might have a career in journalism instead?
It was much later.
Okay.
Miss America, of course, changed my life.
Okay.
And following that, I had lots of opportunities to do things, and I really didn't think that much about television news until 1976 and 77.
Okay.
I was divorced, had no money, a new little baby, and I knew for the first time in my life, I thought, I've got nobody to depend on financially. My parents had helped me, but I wasn't going to let that stay a staple. And so I took a job at the State Department of Education, and kind of a throwaway opportunity for them is they had a lot of new channels I needed to fill, and they said, would you do a show, education show? So I started that, and about that time they were beginning to accept women in television news. So because I had a high name recognition, I auditioned for that, and I learned during Miss America that you never throw away anything. So I always try to prepare for any opportunity, and then I can decide later if I feel like it's not the right one, but always to do your best.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I really loved it.
So that spark was lit then?
Yes,
at school.
yes.
Yeah.
Channel 5 and television 6 and 10. It was the hours are difficult.
Yes.
With children.
Yeah.
But I loved the work. We just loved it. So
Great.
I had a 17-year career in that.
Yeah. So I love that kind of comes later. So let's talk about then going into the pageant stuff.
Okay.
And you know, you're at Oklahoma City University, and do you just kind of knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'd like to do this"?
No,
How does that happen?
No, I don't. I didn't have that confidence. I had been all-college queen in my freshman year, and so my sorority was like, "Oh, you're great. We want you to do this and that," and then one of the judges for the all-college contest was Dolly Hoskins, and she called me about entering Miss Oklahoma City. And I thought, I really want to enter a pageant someday, but I think I'll wait till I'm a senior and have more experience performing. And she said, well, you need experience for that. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. I was kind of up for anything. And so I entered Miss Oklahoma City with the thinking that this will be great experience. I've never been in a pageant like this, so I'll get to perform. And I had my good friend Don Johnson from OCU, and he played for me, and we did a little medley. And interesting side note on that is my parents, of course, didn't have a great deal of money, and going to OCU was a stretch. So I asked them for Christmas of that year, which was 1965, 66, if they would buy me an evening gown. And so I walked to Shepherd Mall from OCU, and I found this great bright green evening dress. And it was $50, and that's what they got me for Christmas because that's what I wanted. I entered the pageant in March, and the first meeting, they said, now we would really like you girls to all wear white evening gowns. You don't have to, but we'd like for you to. And I could not go back to my parents. I had a $50 green dress, and I was going to wear it. And I stood out like a sore thumb, but I won. Yeah. But when my mother saw me on the stage, she was like, oh my gosh, why didn't we get her a white gown?
And then you had to explain.
Yeah, because everybody else wore a white gown, but it was, I'm grateful for those kinds of experiences.
Yeah. Does the pageant kind of criteria and just general form of how it goes evolve over time, or has it always kind of been, you do perform, you do an act, and you speak?
It evolves over time. It's kind of changed and changed and changed, and it's really not what it was when I won. When I won, there were just the networks on television, and we were among the highest rated shows in America. And there were none of the America's Got Talent or The Voice. There was nothing like that. So it was the American dream, and seeing girls from your home state have their lives totally changed. It was kind of a Cinderella story. Just dreams come true. You're not going to do well if you're not a hard worker and have those characteristics. But it was a great experience, and they still include talent, no longer swimsuit, and evening gown and interview. So the basics of it, but everything around it has changed so much.
Yeah. So you and your green dress win at Oklahoma City. What happens after that? Because you're like, I'm only supposed to be here to get experience, and
that's
you
right,
win,
and here I am.
You get the crown, and you win. And you're like, what has happened?
Exactly. I was very fortunate because Kurt. I'm throwing in these names because some of our listeners will remember them. Kurt Schwartz was the director of the Miss Oklahoma City pageant, and he had a secretarial assistant, Donna House, and she helped me. And we had the best time, and we couldn't find anything for my talent, so I borrowed something she had. I mean, it was that kind of relationship. My mom and I drove to Tulsa for the Miss Oklahoma pageant. I'd never been to Tulsa, and we got lost, of course, but it was, from the beginning, it was a great experience, but I was totally intimidated. Nobody from Laverne came because it was harvest time. So there you go. And so my dad came for the last night, and he was kind of astounded, and he told my mother, she might win this thing. It's not like he thought it was possible beforehand, but it was great, and it was a huge surprise to win. I really wanted to be older, and I'm not quite so naive, and but it was, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess you're so innocent and green at that time.
Oh,
right?
19.
Just yeah.
From Laverne.
Zero life experience.
Right. Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. But, I had great support system. My family, OCU, the pageant director, Tony Spencer, at that time, really made all the difference. I would not have won without the suggestions that Tony made. And, we drove to Atlantic City. I'd never been in an airplane.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, why don't we just drive? And got to go to New York beforehand, which had been a big dream for me. Yeah. And had a fabulous time. And I just said, everything's worth it, all the hard work, because I got to see Broadway. I got to see Manhattan, and it was so much fun. And then went to Atlantic City for the Miss America. And I remember turning to my mother as we went into the big opening presentation where all the contestants were there and their chaperones, and my mother was my chaperone, and I turned to Mother and said, I'm just so intimidated and scared. I'm so happy this is the last time I'll ever do anything like this.
Yeah.
Well, didn't work out like that.
Yeah. So you guys drove all the way
We drove all the way.
Tell me about that road trip.
Well, it was, the back.
It's amazing.
We just had a tiny little place in the back seat to sit because we had hats and evening gowns, and we had everything with us. Yeah. And it was great. It was, and my pageant director, who could not come to, the only time she ever missed the Miss America pageant when she was director was that year. Yeah. And I was so disappointed for her because she was kind of a character, and everybody knew her, and she would have been the happiest person there.
Yeah.
Even more so than I was, more so than my parents, because we were kind of scared at what happened and what's ahead. But Tony would have just loved it.
Yeah, well, I mean, going from Laverne to New York City in 1967, right?
Yeah, it was culture shock.
That's two different worlds.
It's two different worlds, and one of the greatest gifts of that year is that I got to live in Manhattan. I had a suite in a hotel, and I traveled almost every day. But if I had 2 days off, we'd go back to New York. And I always had a chaperone, except when I was there, and I could go shopping and be a little bit more normal.
Yeah,
it's a big shock at that time. It's not quite the same now,
right.
But that time, I mean, the second you win, there's probably 70, 80 press people there, and I had to have armed guards.
Yeah, and
it was like, what in the world am I going to do? Yeah. Didn't they pay attention, those judges? Didn't they see what a young, inexperienced person I was?
So
I'm glad they didn't.
Well, yeah. Like, there's so many great things that come from that and come out of that, right? You get to travel the world. You get to live in New York. Like this.
Life-changing. Yeah. Whole different future because of that. And I think that attitude really helped me as a candidate because I wasn't dead set on winning. I was just having the time of my life. I had a banner that said Miss Oklahoma. I got to walk that runway that I dreamed about and seen on television year after year. Got to meet all these wonderful young women from across the nation. And I love performing, and to think that I could perform on that stage. And again, we changed my talent to, there was a popular song called 1, 2, 3, and I also studied conducting. And so we changed my talent to singing and conducting the orchestra. I never rehearsed it live with an orchestra until the 5-minute rehearsal for my talent. And it's just like, great. But I'd practiced in our little garage in Laverne a million times.
Yeah.
So that just kind of takes over when you're that dedicated to doing something.
Yeah, because you just take yourself back to your garage, right? You don't think there's hundreds of people or thousands of people in front of you.
Well, you're a golfer, you're an athlete. It's like muscle memory.
Yeah, you're right.
And fortunately, it and because I loved it. I won talent my night of preliminary competition, and it's a fun song, and nobody had ever seen anything like it, and we really made it up.
So you win.
So I win.
Like you just said, all hell breaks loose, right?
Yes.
You got people you got cameras in your face, you got lights everywhere, people wanting interviews, wanting their sound bites, and this young girl from Laverne, Oklahoma.
And my parents were going to leave. My parents had to go home, and I was like, what am I going to do? They're going to find out that I can't say 10 words in front of people.
Yeah. So what then? After that kind of calms down. And I guess the judges come to you, and then you're.
That's it. Day one, you're off.
Right?
Yep, you're off for a year.
Hit the road.
Almost daily.
Yeah, all over the
New
country,
York
all over
press,
the world.
This all over the world.
Okay. Yeah.
At that time,
So good.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember going to my first big luncheon. It was a United Way kickoff campaign in Detroit. And Jules Bergman, science editor for one of the networks, was the featured speaker. He was so kind to me. And I saw my name on the program. I was sitting at the front on the speaker's table. My name, and I asked my chaperone, I said, what am I supposed to do? She said, well, just say a few words. What few words?
Hi, my name is, and I'm from Oklahoma.
Oh, and I'm from Laverne. And I hope you guys are glad to be here. I don't know what I said, but they were always so kind and generous. Yeah. Even the New York press, which is oftentimes kind of hard on people.
Yeah, a bit ruthless, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess you're famous now, right? You are Miss America.
So what do you think about this?
Yeah.
What do you think about Vietnam? What do you think about, being a spokesperson for my whole generation?
Right.
And the pageant really doesn't help you on that.
Right. They've done their bit. They've had their event.
Yeah. Now you're it.
You won. Okay, now they'll take care of you.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
It was. I'm glad there wasn't social media at the time.
100%. Yeah. Can you imagine how hard that would have been?
If I made a mistake, it would have been.
Yeah.
And I made lots of mistakes, but people were kind and generous,
19,
and they knew I was
old.
trying. I'm a fairly transparent person, and so I think they could see that I was just doing my best.
Yeah.
Here I am.
You're famous, right? And you take yourself to 1967, and for me, I think of all the famous kind of singers, actors, I'm a big fan of Steve McQueen, and you think of Frank Sinatra, and just whoever it is, because you've won this, you are effectively on the same level as they are, which is mad to think that, right? But it's true.
It is. And it's instant.
Yeah.
And, I did network. I did the Today Show 2 days later. But nothing was especially hard. I was on such a fast track that I just did they organized it so incredibly well. Yeah. And I made money almost every day, which, I'd been living on $10 a month allowance. Yeah. Plus everything was paid for at school. And then all of a sudden you're making thousands of dollars, and the pageant, they booked everything I did. They took care of the tiniest detail. And all I did was, just show up and do my best and keep going. Yeah. And it was amazing, really.
Yeah, for 1 year, you're just on this train.
You're just on that. And if you're older, I think you can appreciate it more.
Yeah.
And take advantage of the opportunities. I was very homesick. I wanted my friends. I wanted my family. And 2 years later, it would have been a very different experience.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned combat in Vietnam. You were the first.
Yes, to go to a combat zone. We'd always had a tradition of being representative of this country and being involved with USO trips, but we had not been of late. And then this had been a big dream of mine.
Yeah.
My father and my uncles all served in World War II, and I grew up in a very patriotic family. And Jane Froman was an actress-singer that there was a movie about her called With a Song in My Heart, and I would love that movie. And I loved her. She was in a terrible accident, and she still kept going back, even though she no longer could walk easily, to be a USO performer. And so one of my favorite songs to perform was With a Song in My Heart. So every time they'd ask me about Vietnam, I'd say, I just want to go. And I didn't have a political opinion, which I'm glad I didn't. I just knew that I wanted to perform for our guys who were serving. They may not have believed in the war either, but they served their country when asked or forced.
Right. Yeah.
Since so many of my friends, if you dropped out of college, you were gone.
Yeah.
And it was, without a doubt, the most impactful experience of that year. Again, there were 6 of us from all different states who performed, and nobody had done this at this time going into a combat zone. So there were things that they improved upon in subsequent years. But my cousin was there. There were a couple of guys from Laverne who were there that I saw. And that happened to all of us. And oh, wow, just great audiences. And you just left feeling, what's the least we can do? My gosh. And it was a sad time for America because these guys and gals came back to an unwelcome country. And that was the hardest thing for me for a long, long time. And I'd say in the last decade, maybe, there's been more attention paid to that.
I can't imagine why. Yeah, going over there, like I said, just
miserable.
Going to a war zone,
Yeah, and miserable environment.
Right.
And then seeing your buddy shot or your life changed.
Yeah. And then being not
War's
appreciated
awful.
is not.
Yes, but the least.
And nobody knows what you've dealt with.
Right.
Yeah, that's not great at all. What to the point of kind of coming home and back? What was it like then after your year on the road of being in the limelight and going to these lunches with all these people and people just kind of in awe of you for a straight year? What's it like coming off of that?
Well, that's a good question because that was the biggest adjustment.
Yeah.
I mean, you adjust to being Miss America, I'd say within a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Or you're miserable. So you adjust to that and then you go back. And that's why if you're older, it works better. You're graduated from college and you already were kind of flung into the world and you were more career oriented. For me, I'd had 2 years of college. I went back to OCU, which was wonderful for me because I still had my same group of friends. They were great. I fit right back in with them. But school was a little different. The first morning I went to the cafeteria for breakfast, everyone stopped eating and turned and looked at me. I was mortified. I never went back. I'd already paid my meal plan. Yeah. I never went back to eating over there. But the rest of the school is small enough, and the kids that go there are pretty focused on what they're doing. So that being on campus was comfortable. It was tough to date because as a 19-year-old, dating, I was intimidating to most guys. So I dated a few older people, and then life became more normal in time, but not completely.
Well, and too, like when you're in that position, right? You're Miss America, right? You're effectively the most beautiful female in America at that time.
Nobody is who wins. But that's everyone thinks
year,
that.
Yeah, you've had a year on the road of people, So you have all this marketing that everyone else at home is seeing, and then you walk in the cafeteria and I was like, she's just arrived,
Right.
she's here, right? And you get that feeling like, I don't have 3 heads. I'm not an
I
alien.
know,
I'm just,
I
Jane, I'm just
know.
me,
I remember going to an OU basketball game, and this was even a few years later, and a friend of mine who worked in television, she said, don't you kind of like it when you walk in and everybody looks? I said, no, I really don't.
Yeah, been through that before.
It just makes me shy again.
Yeah. It's a kind of a natural feeling, right? When everyone's
I
kind of
think
looking
so.
at you.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's good or bad, it's like, why are you all looking at me?
I
for?
know,
It's
but
like,
it was a little uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
Performing is different
Yes, I
than
agree.
being alive and living.
yeah.
And I'm not the only performer that is like that, but you get into a kind of not a character because you're still yourself, but still there's something that kind of takes over when you're performing. And I'm grateful that I have the ability and enjoyment of doing that.
Did this year then being Miss America on the road, did that when you came back to OCU, did that change your kind of view on what you want to do in the future?
Oh,
Were you
absolutely.
Okay, and you were making money, right? So you still had money,
Right, I had
to do, and you still had
I
you
had
have money in
money,
the bank now.
and I had scholarships. I graduated, didn't pay another penny,
Yeah.
and that's the Miss America scholarship.
Yeah.
And so that's fabulous. And there was still some left to take to work on my master's, which I did. But what really changed, several things, but I had always dreamed of trying for Broadway and doing music theater. And what I discovered about myself that year was traveling all the time, not being part of a stable community, wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So I no longer wanted to be on Broadway. I loved music theater. I continued to do that. But I also knew that I wasn't a teacher. And I actually did my student teaching, and that was confirmed that I wasn't a teacher. Everybody in my family teaches school. I couldn't get the kids to do anything. It's not my calling. And so then I really kind of stumbled around a bit in terms of trying to find. You are hired a lot to MC local pageants throughout the country. So, and that paid very well. So I did that and got married but was really searching. I did music theater in Oklahoma and in Texas. But again, I wanted to be here. I wanted to be close to my family and my friends and have the same church every Sunday. And that was really important.
Yeah, so that's, I guess, when we slowly get to you doing the journalism thing then.
Yes.
Yeah, 10 years later.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
To which you had a lot, obviously very successful doing it, ended up taking you to Dallas to do that down there and,
I loved
successful.
it. It was just hard to combine that with being a mom, and I was a single mom most of my son's life. Mm-hmm. So that was the tough part.
Yeah.
And when I was in Texas, I loved working there. I had the newsroom was just fabulous. Scott Pelley, who's a CBS News anchor on 60 Minutes, he was my producer. He was just a young guy. And the people I worked with and the actual work, I just loved it. But I didn't have family there. And that meant for my son, who was in first grade, if there was any kind of crisis or anything, I was in trouble with that. And then trying to travel and so every year, about the same time I signed my contract with KXAS in Dallas, Fort Worth, Lee Allen Smith from Oklahoma would call me and say, "Are you ready to come home yet?" And one year I said, "Yeah, I think I am. I need to for my son." And so Lee Allen, who was general manager at Channel 4 in Oklahoma City, said, "Well, what newscast do you want to do?" I said, "I'd like to do the 5 and 6, but I need money. I need to be paid well to do that." And he said he took care of it.
That's amazing. He's so great.
He's so fabulous.
He's so great.
I love him so much.
Yeah, he tells great stories too.
I bet.
We had a fantastic chat with him last year at his house.
I'm so glad.
Yeah,
because he is one of a kind.
Yeah.
And he is Mr. Oklahoma. Yeah. No doubt about it.
So that brings you back to Oklahoma City then?
Yeah.
And so happy to come back.
I was so happy to come back. probably working in news was a little harder to do then after being in a top 10 market than to come back here and not even be doing the 10 o'clock. So I had a bit of adjustment doing the 5 and 6. And then the stations sold, and they looked and thought, we're paying this national company that bought the station. I'm paying Jane Jayroe and Linda Cavanaugh this much, and they're not even on the 10 o'clock. Well, Linda was on the 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
And the other spot that made them more money was early morning. So they came to me. I hadn't even signed a contract going forward because I trusted Lee Allen.
Yeah.
Everybody did.
Yeah.
So much. And then he was out overnight, and I didn't have a contract, and they came and said, we will keep you at this salary only if you go to the early morning. And talk about not a fit.
And when they mean early morning, they mean 3 a.m.
They mean
early morning.
really early morning,
Yeah.
like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
You're right. And so I went back to Channel 5 at that time and did the 6 and 10 o'clock. And then Tyler's, my son's senior year of high school, I left the industry and went to another job.
Okay. What did you go to?
I was a spokesperson for the Oklahoma Health Center, vice president of the Presbyterian Health Foundation, and I did medical news then for Channel 5, did stories, but that gave me a regular time, and they had a great person kind of in the wings too, Jennifer Eve. She did a great job. And so, but I never, in terms of television, the greatest experiences for me were beginning at Channel 5. We had a fabulous news director and a great news team, and then the time in Dallas was great.
Yeah.
But I loved it all. I mean, I loved it all.
Well, and you're home, right?
I was home. I was back at my church, and I had my friends, and my mother was 3.5 hours away and could come. She was getting ready to retire, and so every time, as a single mom again, Tyler had to have his wisdom teeth out. Not only was I working, but I just wanted somebody's emotional support. He was so precious to me. And I think for single moms, it's the lack of emotional support as much as anything. Just never having that backup. Well, what do you think we should do? I don't know. Call your mother.
Yeah. I have a lot to thank my mum for. She's great.
That's great.
And just all the my grandma, my aunts, like, it's just, you're right, just that emotional support that generally a dad or an uncle doesn't give you, that you sometimes need every now and then.
Absolutely.
And I am the emotional one in my family, so
that's
I
great.
definitely needed it. So this is kind of, you're back home now, you move away from the news stations, you're in a different job, but you're still telling stories, you're still kind of
I'm still telling stories.
Yeah.
It's always come down to that, really, or communicating things that people care about.
Yeah.
I like to think, even as a volunteer, that's the skill set that I brought to a board of directors. Is I might struggle to understand the budget, but I love people. I love Oklahomans, and I'm always interested in finding a way to encourage others through the stories of real people.
Yeah. The other things that are kind of, you've been involved in is also the tourism side of Oklahoma. Yes. Right? Which goes to your love of Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And I thought I knew Oklahoma until I was Cabinet Secretary of Tourism and head of the tourism department. And that was just so much fun. I had, again, a great staff that could fill in my deficiencies, but I got to travel and visit all the state parks, and I saw places in southeastern Oklahoma I didn't know were there, and they were magnificent. Yeah. And I saw places in northwestern Oklahoma where I'd grown up I'd never been to that were just spectacular. And so that was a natural for me, and I loved it, being able to tell Oklahomans why they should be proud, how they could enjoy the state, what great resources we had, and selling Oklahoma out of state and out of the country even.
Yeah. Well, and you were used to traveling, and you said Tyler's older at that point, you kind of go on the road.
Right.
And you have this, this love to tell stories, and what better stories to tell than from your own state?
That's right. That's right. So
cool
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But as is often the case when the governor changes, that position changes. So
you did it for a while, though, didn't you?
I did it for 4 years.
Yeah.
I wish I'd had 8 because it was a very steep learning curve. I'd never been involved with government, and that was a whole different thing. And then just understanding the workings. Frank Keating, who's the governor that appointed me, and he was great, but he would never waste any time. He met at breakfast, he met at lunch. If he had a day that he didn't have a luncheon scheduled, he'd call cabinet secretaries in because he would always say, we're in a hurry. Government changes slowly, and so you can't waste any time in trying to make these changes that we feel are important to make.
Yeah.
So it was really a busy year.
Yeah, well, and something that you're used to,
But
it
I
sounds
loved
like.
it. Yeah,
I think
that's
if
right.
you're just sitting around doing nothing, you
I'm
get
not
bored
that.
very easily doing that, right?
That's right.
Tell me about, because you've written 2 books, right?
Yes, well, let's see. I've written 2 books, and then I participated in a coffee table book, and I wrote the narrative.
Okay.
So there are a few other things, but primarily 3 books, I guess.
Where does the love of writing come from?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was just always there. I was just a crazy kid when it came to reading books. I mean, I read all the time. And part of that is my love of the fantasies, of the dreams. So that was appealing. But I just loved reading. And it sounds so stupid, part of what I loved about news anchoring was, I think, my writing. It extended my writing ability, and I love to read on camera. It was just a huge part of my life, reading and writing. I always journaled as a kid, and music I didn't really expand that much, but you get a great liberal arts education at OCU, so my writing was there. I had great teachers, and then my master's degree was in humanities.
Okay.
I did a lot more writing, but I had not written for public use like that until television news happened.
Yeah.
And the first news director where I worked quit because they hired me, and because he thought, and the first anchor was the same. They just thought I was, going to sit there like a Barbie doll, and they'd have to do everything for me. But I loved the writing. I loved it, and always did my own writing.
And I mean, reading a teleprompter is really hard. I've tried.
It's harder than it looks. It does.
And the cadence and how, it's
right. And making it sound natural as if you were just speaking to people. It is a lot harder than it looks. And I like doing it. I don't know what that says, but...
Well, and it sounds like it might be a little easier if you have written it already, rather than someone writing it for you.
That's a good observation, because it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I can read anything on a teleprompter that somebody writes and can do it almost without mistakes for a long period of time. But it makes all the difference, whether I'm emceeing or doing television news. If I write it, it's so much easier to deliver.
Yeah. One thing I think people will know your name for, is just you're just very involved, with boards, or, you're current president of the Oklahoma City Philharmonic, which obviously recently had a pretty big event.
Yes.
Mr. Bell, I believe, is that his job?
Yes, Joshua Bell.
So you're very involved with a lot of stuff. And we'll get to the Philharmonic thing, because I do want to talk about that in a second. But tell me, we've got when I told you, when I text Lance McDaniel asking him that I was, telling him that I was interviewing you today, he said, Jane has to talk about Esther Women.
That's so sweet of him.
Yeah, he's great.
He is. I adore him. And I keep telling his parents, whom I'm very close to, that I know Lance is getting older, but we would still like to adopt him.
Yes. No,
At any time, we would do that.
Yeah.
Because Brenda, his mom, grew up in Laverne, too. I don't know.
Oh, really? Okay.
Close. She was on a farm, but so we have lots in common.
Lots of history.
Yeah, lots of history. Well, when I was serving as cabinet secretary for Governor Keating, there was an assignment editor, that's news, the appointments director. And that was Kay Dudley. And I didn't know Kay before I served in that position, and she became my mentor. I loved her. And she was a great woman of faith. And so if I was just really bummed out because I felt like I was in over my head, I would go in and talk to Kay, and she would always say, just remember you were created for such a time as this, which is the scripture from Esther that most people remember. And so it was so important to me to be reminded that God doesn't put us places and desert us, but that there was I had support. And even if I made mistakes, what really mattered was my relationship with him, and that he would see me through. And so I thought, I think there are a lot of women in high positions, meaning a position of authority or a position of philanthropy or professionally, and that probably need to hear that. And when this job is over, I'm going to do a series for women in leadership positions, and I'll call it Esther Women. So I did that the year following when I left government. And it was a one-time thing, 6 weeks, invited 40 people. Well, I invited a lot of people. 40 people signed up, and they were mostly friends in government, Supreme Court justices, beautiful women in philanthropy, leaders of all kinds, pastors. And so when it was over, they loved it and said, you can't quit. Well, that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And after being there about 12 years, I think, I was done. And then my friend, who was associate minister at the time at St. Luke's, came to me and she said, if you're finished, then be content with that. But if you want to go public, St. Luke's will help you. And I said, right now, Linda, I can't think of one speaker, and it's just a burden. It's become a burden. She said, well, just sleep on it and pray about it. So I said, okay. The next morning I woke up, I had the whole season in my mind, every speaker, and exactly how we'd do it. And then it took a lot of work from Linda Brinkworth and the support of St. Luke's to make that happen. We didn't know if we'd had 40. Didn't know if there'd be 100, but the room held 450, and it's been full ever since, which is, now COVID was, sure. We didn't do the same thing then, but usually with a waiting list, and it's just been a huge blessing for me. I mean, I won't say that it's not work, because it is, but it is a blessing, and it's a sense of purpose and meaning that's very rewarding for me.
Yeah.
And now Terry Cornett is helping me, because I have gotten myself in the last year in a position of doing some other things that I couldn't keep doing it at the same level, and Terry is helping me.
I mean, the first thing I can think of is it goes back to what your mother told you, right? When you have a gift, you should perfect it,
yeah.
But you should also give back, and that's exactly what you've done, right?
Well,
created, and obviously now with the help of so many other people to grow it and get it to where it's at. But it starts with that idea.
It does.
It's something that's been ingrained in you since you were a little girl. That
you're right.
You look back through your life and you see that there's all these little decisions that you've made that come back to that. You have a gift, right? And it's your job to perfect that gift and get it better. But it's also your job to give back to others and create a life, your life, to help other people as well.
Well, there's great joy in that. And so I am grateful that I had that early training.
Yeah.
My mother made me go to choir practice. I was the only kid in choir practice. I just would complain. And the minute I'd get there, they just all made over me. And I loved singing, and I really loved it. But I wouldn't tell my mother that.
Of course not.
Those are the teenage years,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to be here. Why are you dragging me places?
Why do I have to go?
I want to go be real.
Nobody else has to go.
Yeah,
she had none of it.
There's so many conversations like that we have with our parents, right? 10, 15 years later, you're like, thank you, because I really enjoyed that. I didn't at the time. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I appreciate it now.
That's right. So true.
So recently, then you're president of Oklahoma City Philharmonic, back to love of music and classical music now as well.
Yes,
you're leading that.
It's been a joy.
Yeah.
I've just enjoyed it so much. And we had a little rough spot because our executive director moved on unexpectedly. And so it required a lot more of my time. And yet I'm grateful for that too, because it enabled me to kind of dig deeper into the organization. And it's always about relationships for me, and getting to know the staff is just really talented and work as a team. But they're primarily new.
Yeah.
So, but COVID did that to a lot of organizations. And so I've loved it, and I've always been involved at some level with OCU, and now I'm vice chair of the board. So, but I think it's because I wanted more children, and I didn't have the chance to do that. So I love getting to know our students and seeing their career, and many of them I stay connected to for forever.
Yeah.
And that's just such a gift.
That's brilliant. One of the things that you've kind of referred to multiple times while we've been chatting as well is just the fact that we should dream more. You dream a lot, right? And you kind of manifestation, whatever you want to call it, it's clearly something that you've experienced. By dreaming, you're going to walk down, down the pageant strip and then all this stuff. And then, obviously through hard work, it gets there, but it does start with dreaming.
It does start with dreaming and not accepting maybe the expectations that others have for you, but trying to define them yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never was a person that just had, this is a goal, this is a goal, this is a goal. But I had the dreams. And Kristen Chenoweth and Kelly O'Hara are friends of mine who are graduates of OCU and have achieved amazing stature in their field of music. So I've had conversations with them. Why, especially Broadway? Why do you think these? I mean, they're both Oklahomans. They're both Hall of Famers. And why do you think you can go to New York? What made you think that? And I think it's just you don't know what you can't do. You grow up in the midst of encouragement with your family and your community. And it's not that you have a lot of confidence that you can be great. It's just that you want to do it. And so you don't know what you can't do. So you just do it.
Yeah.
And work hard. It just seems to work for our kids. Yeah. And I think that's wonderful that they don't know what they can't do.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. I'm a big dreamer. I'm the dreamer.
Great.
Me and my wife. My wife's more like the, like the strategic kind of, like the planner. And I'm like, I'll dream about it and we'll figure it out. This is how I ended up with the podcast. I think about Oklahoma. I never thought I'd be doing something like this, but sometimes you just have a dream of figuring something out. And
that's right.
Yeah, I don't think
how
the
we're
dream.
made.
Yeah, the dream wasn't to be a podcaster, but the dream was to kind of be in this sort of area, right? And then you kind of figure it out. But I keep thinking back to, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Dolly Hoskins, right?
Oh.
Like you you mentioned kind of taking turns and you going to OCU was such a big turn and pivotal moment in your life. And then, there's all these people that direct you.
But she called, you're right.
It's amazing. I love stuff, every time I do a podcast like this, there's always a point in someone's life or a person, and for me, it's I have the same thing. I have someone in my life that gave me the opportunity to stay in this country, or the idea to stay in this country. And, for you, you look back and you're like, I would never have gone for experience, and then. No,
I'm glad you pointed that out. I'd never really thought about Dolly because all she did was call me and encourage me and be kind of persistent. But then Tony Spencer, I promise you I would not have won. I might not have made the top 10 if she hadn't changed my talent and worked with me all the time.
Yeah.
To not sound too Oklahoman.
Yeah, you're right.
But then, then there was a news director at Channel 5 who just mentored me and encouraged me, and they're sprinkled throughout life.
Yeah.
And then it's our job to be the sprinkler going forward.
finishing up then, what are you working on right now? What's kind of top of mind at the moment? What are you excited about? What do you want to tell people listening that they, is there any shows coming up? Because you're very busy,
Yes, and the Philharmonic has a great show coming up. Alexander, who's from the maestro from Germany, loves Oklahoma stories. Yeah. And so he is doing that. And so in May, we're honoring what would have been the 100th birthday of Clara Luper. Okay. And it's going to be amazing, just amazing, musically, as an experience for Oklahoma City. So that's great. And next season's been announced. It's going to be great as well. Okay. OCU, if you like entertainment, there's not a better spot in Oklahoma than to experience that dance school and the music school. And so I'm always looking forward to that. The best experiences, it's no accident that Christmas is Vespers, OCU Dance Show, and the Philharmonic. And church, of course. That's year-round as well. So I'm always excited about those kinds of things. I did write, as part of COVID, I volunteered to write a column for the Oklahoman, and I felt a calling to do that. I thought, there's no way they're interested in that. No way. But they did it. And they signed me up. And so for the last 3 years, I've written a weekly and then weekly and then every other week column for the Oklahoman that are devotional, inspirational in nature. So I've stopped doing that, and I'm going to do a book with that and do some new ones. And so that will be another project. Yeah. I know people look at me and go, are you sure you want to be this busy? It's just natural for me.
Well, it keeps you going. You love doing it.
I do.
If you didn't like doing it, it would be different.
That's right. That's right.
Really another one.
Yeah.
But, for people listening, the website for Oklahoma City Philharmonic is just okcphil.org. So go to that for all the information. On Clara Luper's 100th birthday show.
Thank you for letting me share that.
I've met Alexander, and
great.
He needs to come on the podcast.
He
met him a couple
and
of times.
He loves Oklahoma.
He's brilliant.
And, I know we'll have the Oklahoma Stories is just a fabulous idea. And we've got our first recording on Nexus, which is a big deal in the classical world. And it's a bright future for the Philharmonic.
Well, thank you so much for coming down, spending an hour of your time telling stories. I know there are hundreds of stories we didn't get to, but thank you so much for everything you do. I really appreciate it. Congratulations on being in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame.
Thank you.
2007.
It's still a great honor. Always will be.
And for everyone listening, I will post the link in the description to everything you need to find, the website for the Oklahoma City Philharmonic, and we'll find the website for Oklahoma City University's events and put that in the link as well. And we'll catch you next episode. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.